Welcome to the City Current Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We're always honored to bring you inspiring stories of individuals and organizations making a difference, empowering the good. And we love having keynote speakers, best-selling authors, coaches, and so much more on the show. And that's why we're honored to kick it off with Lucas Jadin and Steve Jones, co-founders of Jadin Jones Coaching, also co-authors of The Twin Thieves, How Great Leaders Build Great Teams. And we'll talk all about that book and more, but how are you two guys doing?
We're doing great. Thank you, Jeremy, for having us on today.
So let's go ahead and start with a little bit of each of your backgrounds. We'll talk about you individually. We'll talk about how you met. We'll talk all about what you do and obviously the book. And so let's go ahead and dive in. Let's start, Lucas, on your end. So Lucas, give us a little bit of your background because you've got an amazing, when you talk about best-selling author, speaker, mindset coach, give us some of your background.
Absolutely. And so at the end of the day, my story begins growing up in high school. Athletics was the thing that I loved the most. But my limiter that I didn't even know at the time was from the mental end. And so when I finally started to unpack that, new realities and new opportunities just came about. And so I took that passion and turned it into how I could help people to get that same level of freedom. And so that's where it really started from me. And now today has flowed into what we get to do for athletes and businesses alike. And then ultimately where I got to meet Steve and just jumping right into my perspective of his background. One of the things that was so special about Steve is he's a longtime teacher and coach to start. And as a coach, he coached at the highest division in Wisconsin. Both of us are from Wisconsin in football. And his team had the longest winning streak in the nation at one point, 70 games in a row, a 129-9 record. And I got the opportunity to learn from him and see behind the scenes. And I was the one looking for what was this magic bullet? What did they figure out that others didn't? But what I found was he did it off of building a connected team, a team built on love versus fear, which is kind of the stereotypical football coach. And it was amazing how he pulled out a unique level of grit, commitment, focus to the process because of his leadership. And then most recently, he left teaching full-time at the end of last school year, and his first speaking client full-time was the Green Bay Packers. And so I've just watched him thrive now as a speaker, truly believe he's one of the best in the world with his story, and been able to watch him grow. So that's a bit of my perspective on his backdrop as well.
Yeah, hey, that's between the winning record and then stepping in right out of the gates with the Green Bay Packers. I'm not sure it gets a whole lot better than that. But what would you add, Steve, when you talk about your background, obviously as a coach, amazing, legacy when you look at the winning record and obviously the record on that side in terms of the streak, the winning streak. Give us a little bit of your perspective on that, and then obviously even tied in, to Jadin Jones.
Yeah, that streak and that career was amazing. I think the other interesting part was I was able to teach 3 different leadership classes at our high school. So I was able to teach and develop 3 separate leadership classes. So my whole day was really revolved around leadership, and it was open to all types of kids in our school. But I got to listen to a bunch of podcasts and read books and watch TED Talks, but most importantly, learn from our young leaders. And then I got to take some of those principles and some of those theories and then see if they actually worked on the football field in a highly competitive, unpredictable environment with lots of alpha males, and see if actually the stuff we were talking about worked. And that was kind of the fun part, is really kind of diving into leadership and seeing how that transformed into, those situations where we are going to see if we can put the things that we're learning into actual practice. And we were in the midst of that 70-game win streak. And I started getting some calls from a bunch of people, and one in particular from Lucas Jadin. And I'm not proud to say that, but I ducked a few of those calls because he was at a rival school down the road. But eventually I got enough nudges to give him a call back. He came down to my classroom. We met for about an hour or two. And I'll tell you what, I learned more in that hour or two than he did. There's no doubt about it. I left with about 5 pages worth of notes. He started working with our kids. I thought I knew about mindset and mental skills until I started to get to know Lucas. He made me better. He made our program better. And then we formed a great relationship. I found out some amazing things that he's working with the LA Dodgers. He's coaching the manager of the LA Dodgers one-on-one. He's working with Fortune, 500 CEOs, and he's doing amazing things. And we continue to develop that relationship. Co-authored the book, The Twin Thieves, which took off. And then since last summer, we have launched Jadin Jones, and we're getting to work with some amazing leaders and some amazing organizations.
Yeah, and let's bounce it back on your end, Lucas. So when you talk about Jadin Jones Coaching, let's go ahead and talk about overall what you do, because we've talked about mindset, leadership, coaching. So go ahead and give us some perspective overall on what you guys do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the end of the day, it's really simple, is we want people to have better results in whatever their craft is. But we really label those results as not only profits or wins and losses, but also in the key relationships in their lives. And so when we work backwards with that, we believe that there's fundamentals in every craft. Just like in football, the same holds true for business. And when we distill those fundamentals and just really get good at the frequency and the quality of them over and over again, usually the outputs get better. But on that journey, barriers pop up, right? And I think the differentiator is we've asked this question thousands of times. We've gotten over 20,000 responses to this question. What is the toughest mental challenge that you face to being the best leader you can be? And we've collected these answers anonymously. And over the years, what we've seen is a really distinct similarity. And what that was the fear of failure, about what if I give my everything? What if I go all into this, but still come up short? That's number one. And then number two was a bit more subtle, but even more impactful, was the fear of judgment. And if I fail, who am I going to disappoint? Who am I going to let down? And we just saw those coming up to that question over and over, from the high schoolers that Steve was working with, to these people at the highest level of business, to teachers. It didn't matter what the context was. It seemed like any human that took it could relate to the fear of failure and the fear of judgment. And so Steve labeled those as the Twin Thieves. And that is the differentiator in our business, because when I think about what we do different, we really focus on getting to the root, getting below the surface of what is the bottleneck to greater innovation, to better collaboration, to having tough conversations, to all these things that people say they want. What we found was underneath the surface, often the Twin Thieves were robbing us of that potential. And so that's where we begin with people, is helping them to get really clear on what do they want, and then what's getting in the way. How are the Twin Thieves acting as a barrier to their success? And then how do we start to help you unpack it and rise above them?
Yeah, and I think so. What you laid out is obviously what you do, but it's also the book too, right? And so let's go ahead and dive in on your end, Steve. Give us a little bit of perspective when you look at, just like what Lucas is talking about. It's the awareness of the Twin Thieves, but then it's also, how do you break through? How do you accomplish these goals, mindset, everything that we're talking about? So give us a couple of, when you talk about the model and obviously the major takeaways, don't have to dive in too far because we want people to buy the book and obviously use you all, but give us some teasers on how that plays out.
Yeah, well, like you said, I think awareness is the number one thing. We need to take what sometimes is invisible and make it visible. We say that it's impossible to beat an invisible opponent. So once you make people aware, then you have to give them tools and strategies, and sometimes stories because stories stick. So it is not necessarily getting rid of them all. It's how do you rise above the Twin Thieves, because we feel like they never go away. The fear of failure, the fear of judgment, even in the midst of our 70-game win streak, where we won 5 consecutive state championships, they didn't go away. They weren't there. They were still there. And to be honest with you, they continued to magnify, not only for our coaches, but for our players. So we need to continually have the courage to rise above the Twin Thieves. And one of our favorite stories around this is to be the buffalo. And real quickly, there's a unique habitat on the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado where both buffalo and cow share the same habitat. And most times when storms come rolling through, they roll from the west over the Rocky Mountains to the east. So both the buffalo and the cow can see the storms coming. When the storms are coming, the cows, they don't have anything to do with the storms. They want to avoid the storms. So what do? They stand up and they run away from the storm. If you know anything about cows, they're not very fast. So eventually those storms catch the cows, but they still try to avoid them and they still try to run away. So what do they end up doing? They stay in the storm way longer than they need to by trying to avoid it. The buffalo, however, when they see the storms coming, they stand up and they have the courage to run into the storm. They attack the storm head on. Now, just like the cows, they have to encounter the storm, but because they have the courage to do that, they encounter that storm for a lot less time. So on teams and individuals' journeys, it's not about not having problems. It's not about not dealing with storms. It's about the mindset in which you attack the storm. Are you going to be the cow or are you going to be the buffalo?
And, all that goes into what is it? The best way is through, so it's like go through the storm, just like you're talking about. And, but then that gets into the mindset, the courage, the confidence, like all of these things that obviously apply to a team in the sports environment, but just as much to, anyone in terms of leadership, organization, all of that too. So give us, maybe one more illustration around that. It could be a favorite story, either from the book or your coaching, your keynote speaking. Give us one more when it comes to a trick, a tip, a recommendation, kind of like being the buffalo. Give us one more that you want everyone to know about.
I'll share one around mindset. We love this story that's very applicable. It's about a guy named Kano Jigoro. And you see, Kano Jigoro growing up was really into the sport of judo. And he loved it because he was a smaller guy. And finally, he found a sport that matched weight to weight. So it was an even fight, for lack of better words. But over time, what he found was some of the holds that he was using were considered illegal in that sport. So instead of just conforming to the rules that were for the moves that were working with him, for him, he went about creating a whole new sport, the sport of jiu-jitsu. And so an entrepreneur at heart. But so he goes on, of course, in that sport, they have the belt levels. The white belt is the beginner and the black belt is the elite, the highest skill. And so, of course, he became a black belt when you create the sport. But then he went on to spread it around the world after he was done as an athlete. And as the story goes, Kano is many years later on his deathbed, surrounded by some people that he had trained up, some of his most prized students. And they wanted to make sure that Kano, when he passed away, went in honor that he deserved. And so they asked him, they said, "Sensei, what can we do to make sure that you die with the dignity and the honor you deserve?" And he said, "There's only one thing you need to do. When I pass, please make sure that you bury me in my white belt. Because wherever I go to in the next journey, I want to make sure I show up with the mindset of a beginner." And I think that story from an individual level is powerful, because how many times do we see it where we get some success, we get to that black belt level, but we lose the white belt mindset. And so our challenge for people is, once you see the Twin Thieves, one of the traps is they're going to tell you, "Oh, you've got it all figured out." Or "Don't ask that question because you're going to look like a fool." Don't collaborate with somebody else because you got to do it on your own. And what we challenge people is build a black belt skill set, but can you keep a white belt mindset of what got you there? The questioning, the challenging, the open to learn from anybody, regardless of their experience or age, that you're willing to learn and grow. And so on an individual level, it would be really simple. Make sure that you're learning one new thing every single day of how do you get better? How do you evolve and grow every single day to have a white belt mindset? And then how are you supporting your team so that it's safe enough to have a white belt mindset?
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great recommendation and great story right there. I love it. So talk about now where we can buy the book. That's one piece of this, but also too, where it starts with reaching out for your coaching, keynote speaking, and all the good you do.
Yeah, so the book is found on Amazon, and we wrote it the way we like to read them. So it's short. You can get through probably about 3 chapters in about 5 pages and feel really good about yourself. So it is a fable and a lot of stories within it. We tried to make it meaty. And whether it's a Fortune 500 company or a sports organization, there's a lot of people that are using it with their teams to help their teams unpack the Twin Thieves and find out how they can continue to thrive as a team and individually. And then reaching out to us, probably the best way is jadin-jones.com, jadin-jones.com. Jadin is Jadin-jones.com. LinkedIn is another great way to find us as well.
Yeah, and so when you talk about taking those next steps, reaching out, website, social media, obviously so many easy places to go. As you mentioned, jadin-jones.com, and then all over social media as well. So Lucas, Jadin, Steve Jones, co-founders of Jadin Jones Coaching. Once again, the book is The Twin Thieves, How Great Leaders Build Great Teams. So thank you guys for all you do, for powering the good, for coming on the show. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for having us, Jeremy, and doing the work that you do.
Very grateful for your time. Thanks for having us.